The true history of Halloween can be traced back to the Celtic celebration of the festival of Samhain, which translates to summer's end in modern Irish and November in Gaelic. Approximately 2,000 years ago, the Celts occupied territories that are currently identified as Ireland, Scotland, northern France, the United Kingdom, and several other areas in northern Europe. The festival of Samhain was a celebration that preceded the new year on November 1st. In the Celtic calendar, the year was segmented into two halves, one considered light and the other dark. Samhain marked the onset of the year's dark half, or rather the end of the harvest season and the start of winter. According to the Celtic belief, this time of year was believed to be a time in which the veil between the dead and the living were at its thinnest. Samhain, like present-day Halloween, was celebrated on October 31st, and on this day, Celts believed that the ghosts of the dead would return to Earth to visit. Celtic people held 4 quarterly fire festivals each year and considered Samhain to be the most important of the 4 festivals. Samhain was a time where gods were thought to be made visible to humankind, and when ghosts and other worldly spirits would return. Celts held the belief that these spirits assisted in helping the Celtic priests to forecast predictions of the future. People found solace in these revelations and prophecies that helped give comfort ahead of a cold and uncertain winter. Celtic priests, also known as druids, would build large bonfires where Celts would gather to burn crops as well as animals. These sacrifices were considered offerings to their deities. The animals' bones were cast into these bonfires to aid the deceased in their passage. These fires were initially called bonfires because of this custom, giving rise to the term bonfire. During this festivity, one would also predict each other's futures and fortunes. People wore costumes such as animal skins and even animal heads. This is where we can see the long-standing tradition of wearing costumes on Halloween first originated. Once the celebration drew to a conclusion and fires had died out, the sacred large bonfires would once again be relit to aid in protecting the Celtic people from the upcoming winter ahead of them. Some ancient texts document Samhain as a mandatory celebration that would span across 3 days and 3 nights. Attendance was mandatory for the community, and failure to participate was believed to result in punishment from gods, commonly in the form of sickness or death. Early celebrations of Samhain in Ireland also had a military aspect to them, and holiday thrones were prepared for commanders of soldiers. Anyone who committed crimes or used weapons during this celebration would face a death sentence. Because Celts believed the veil between the living and the dead were at their thinnest during Samhain, offerings were prepared and left outside villages and fields for fairies or Sids. It was also believed that ancestors may cross over during Samhain, so Celts would dress as monsters as well as animals to disguise themselves so fairies weren't tempted to kidnap them. Mythology surrounding Samhain included certain monsters, such as a shape-shifting creature known as Púca, who received harvest offerings from the field. It frequently manifests as various creatures, such as horses, goats, cats, dogs, and even hares. The Púca is intricately tied to the agricultural calendar, particularly during the harvest time. Tradition held that any fruit or crops left in the field after November 1st, symbolizing the end of the harvest season and the onset of winter, would be spoiled by the Púca. This legend functioned as a practical way to ensure the timely collection of all crops. Púca Night is a name for Halloween in certain regions of Ireland, and it alludes to the Púca, from which the word spooky originates. Another mythological figure associated with Samhain is the Dullahan, also known as a general term for the headless evil spirit. They sometimes appeared as impish creatures, as well as headless men that carry their heads while riding horses that have eyes of flames. The appearance of Dullahan symbolized a death omen to anyone who encountered them. The Dullahan is a figure known for his eerie travels across the Irish countryside, foretelling the imminent death of a person. Legend has it that when one crosses paths with the Dullahan, he announces the name of the individual about to perish, leading their spirit to depart from their body. Many tales recount encounters with the Dullahan, often depicting how individuals managed to evade his notice by carrying or adorning themselves with gold. It was thought that the Dullahan had an irrational fear of gold. Over time, the legend of the Dullahan has transcended Irish folklore and made its way into modern culture. This mythological entity is featured in both the book and the movie The Legend of the Sleepy Hollow, and it also makes an appearance in the fan-favorite Castlevania video game. Another practice associated with Samhain was carving turnips. Candles were placed inside hollowed-out turnips that had spooky faces carved into them. These carved turnips were held by strings and attached to sticks and were referred to as jack-o'-lanterns. This tradition of carving jack-o'-lanterns has become one of the most symbolic practices of modern-day Halloween. The Irish eventually switched from carving turnips to carving pumpkins. The jack-o'-lantern's inception can be traced back to the Irish folklore of Stingy Jack, a blacksmith known for his inclination towards mischief and alcohol. While there are various versions of this story, a common narrative involves Stingy Jack tricking the devil. Upon Jack's passing, he found himself unwelcome in both heaven and hell. Yet, the devil, displaying a touch of mercy, bestowed upon Jack an ember of coal to illuminate his turnip lantern as he roamed between heaven and hell for eternity. This story was said to be used as a cautionary tale to help impose morality and teach that if one misbehaved like Jack did, then they could end up in a similar predicament. Another tradition practiced by the Celts was dumb supper, where participants would invite their ancestors who had passed away to join them for a meal before they themselves ate. In this context, dumb signifies silence or muteness, emphasizing that the fundamental rule for a dumb supper was to maintain absolute silence during its observance. This practice gave families an opportunity to connect with the spirits of their loved ones or friends until the spirits departed following dinner. During this tradition, children played games to entertain the deceased, while adults shared updates on the past year's events. On that night, it was customary to leave doors and windows open to allow the dead to come in and eat cakes that had been set out for them. As time passed on, most of the Celtic territory was eventually conquered by the Roman Empire, roughly around AD 43. Although the majority of Celtic land was conquered by the Romans, the tradition of Samhain lived on during the course of the 400 years in which the Romans ruled this area. Two festivals that had originated from the Romans were eventually combined with the Celtic celebration of Samhain, the first being Feralia, which was celebrated in late October, in which Romans commemorated the dead. On Feralia, it was customary for the living to honor and pay respects to the dead by visiting their graves, bestowing gifts in the forms of grain, salt, wine-soaked bread, and wreaths, all accompanied by violet petals. The second day was a day that honored Pomona, a Roman goddess of fruit and trees. This festival was celebrated annually on November 1st. As part of this observance, the Romans made offerings of nuts, apples, and other orchard fruits. Apples held special meaning as a symbol of love and fertility during this time. The tradition of bobbing for apples that is still present today is thought to have originated from Pomona, who was symbolized by the apple. As centuries passed, on May 13th in the year 609 AD, Pope Boniface IV consecrated the Pantheon in Rome as a tribute to all Christian martyrs, marking the establishment of the Catholic festival known as All Martyrs' Day in the Western Church. Later, Pope Gregory III expanded the celebration to encompass not only martyrs but all saints as well, as he moved the date of observance from May 13th to November 1st. Moving ahead to the 9th century, Christian influence had extended its reach into Celtic territories, leading to a gradual fusion of their beliefs with traditional Celtic practices. By the year 1000 AD, the Christian Church designated November 2nd as All Souls' Day, with the intention of paying tribute to the departed. Historically, All Souls' Day is recognized as the Church's attempt to supplant the ancient Celtic celebration of Samhain with a comparable Church-approved holiday. Many of the Celtic traditions of Samhain continued to be practiced, including the lighting of bonfires, which now honor Christian heroes, dressing up in costumes, and observing the changing of seasons. An integral addition to their celebration was the practice of souling, in which the poor would knock on doors offering prayers in exchange for soul cakes. All Souls' Day was also known as All Hallows or All Hallow Miss. The night before All Souls' Day eventually came to be known as All Hallows' Eve, and eventually Halloween. After the festival was embraced by Christianity, All Hallows' Eve evolved into a night of vigilance, prayer, and fasting, as people prepared for a milder celebration of the saints on the following day. Halloween eventually arrived in America during the 1840s from Irish immigrants who were fleeing a potato famine back home. Celebrations of the holiday were more common in Maryland as well as the southern colonies. An Americanized version of Halloween emerged due to the different customs and beliefs of European ethnic groups, as well as American Indians, which meshed together to form newer practices. In the early festivities, play parties were organized as public gatherings to commemorate the harvest. Neighbors would exchange stories about those who had passed away, participate in singing and dancing, and tell each other's fortunes, not a far cry from early traditions of the Celtic celebration of Samhain. Ghost stories and mischief-making of various kinds were common during the early colonial festivities. Despite the prevalence of annual autumn celebrations in the mid-19th century, Halloween had not yet gained popularity nationwide. However, the widespread migration of Irish immigrants ultimately led to the widespread celebration of Halloween across the entire country. Trick-or-treating became a popular tradition of celebrations of Halloween in America. This custom traces back to various practices, including mumming, souling, and guising. This can be traced all the way back to the Middle Ages, when individuals would wear costumes and receive food and beverages as a part of a practice called mumming. As time progressed around the 9th century, this custom evolved and became known as souling, as mentioned before, which was specifically observed on All Souls' Day. During the 16th century, the practice of guising became popular in Ireland and Scotland. Young people participated in this tradition where they would dress in costumes and go door to door accepting offerings. Instead of praying for the dead like the Christian practice of souling, one would recite poems, sing songs, and tell jokes in exchange for a treat, which usually consisted of nuts, fruits, or coins. The tradition of trick-or-treating didn't appear to gain widespread popularity until the 1930s. The term trick-or-treating made its first appearance in the United States in 1932, and it was first used in a national publication in 1939. Americans would dress up in costumes and go house to house, requesting both food and sometimes money. This tradition emerged as a cost-effective method for communities to engage in Halloween festivities. Families could prevent potential pranks by offering local children small treats. Into the late 1800s, there was a motivation to mold Halloween into a celebration centered around community and neighborly get-togethers, rather than a focus on ghosts, witchcraft, and pranks. Halloween parties became the most popular way to celebrate the holiday. These parties revolved around festive costumes, seasonal foods, and games. Over time, newspapers and community leaders encouraged parents to remove anything disturbing or grotesque from Halloween celebrations. Because of these initiatives, Halloween started to shed some of its superstitious and religious connotations by the beginning of the 20th century. Halloween became a secular, albeit community-centered holiday, celebrated with town-wide Halloween parties and parades. Halloween remains a beloved and hugely popular holiday in America to this day, bringing several billions of dollars of sales into the economy annually. People participating in this holiday may decorate their houses with orange and purple lights, spooky imagery of witches and skeletons, and carved jack-o'-lanterns placed at their front doors. Children, teenagers, and even adults dress themselves in an array of costumes, ranging from characters found in popular movies, TV shows, and literature to classic Halloween figures like witches, ghosts, and zombies. Young people celebrate the night going door to door trick-or-treating while holding bags to be filled with candy. As Halloween has evolved and borrowed from traditions and celebrations of the past, it'll be interesting to see how this holiday will inevitably change again over time.